Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. This is really the final webinar at the moment in our series of Back to Business Scaling Up that is hosted here by the Santa Cruz Valley Economic Development Corporation. I'm Holly Schroeder. I am the President and CEO. We are doing these webinars in partnership with the Santa Cruz Valley Chamber of Commerce and supported by a grant that we received from the Wells Fargo Foundation. This series of webinars has been about helping our businesses prepare for what's really starting to happen today and the past couple of days and the days to come, which is to move towards reopening the economy after the safer at home shelter in place orders are starting to be relaxed. We know that the businesses that have remained open, in whatever form they've remained open, have been going through a tremendous learning process of, some trial and error and learning and feedback from their employees and their customers and figuring out how to best apply the social distancing and other practices that are becoming the norm. And we want to share those learnings with all of the businesses across the Santa Cruz Valley so that everybody's learning curve is shortened. We learn best practices across different sectors. We learn best practices across businesses so that as the economy moves to its full reopening, we are doing so in the most safe and protective and thoughtful way that we can in order to avoid any, hopefully any resurgence of cases and a round two of the virus coming back. So I want to thank everybody for joining in here this morning. All of the webinars are on our website at scvedc.org/scalingup. You can go back and rewatch those that we've done before. And again, thanks for joining us today. As I mentioned, we're doing this in partnership with the Santa Cruz Valley Chamber of Commerce, and John Musella is here today. John, did you want to say a few words of welcome?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Holly, and good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is John Musella with Santa Cruz Valley Chamber of Commerce, and as many of you know, the SCV Chamber represents a 65,000 member workforce here in the Santa Cruz Valley. We are so glad that our businesses are finally getting back to work now after this pandemic. The shutdown. The SCV Chamber worked really closely with the City of Santa Clarita and the County of Los Angeles to make the case for reopening business sooner rather than later. We launched last week our new Impact SCV Advocacy Program, which is our first grassroots mobilization effort to demonstrate the groundswell of support here in the Santa Cruz Valley for reopening. And thanks to so many of you, we're actually able to generate 3,200 emails to the County Board of Supervisors to make that case for reopening Santa Clarita. And obviously, we had some success with help of our county and city leadership. Today, we're again pleased to be partnering with the SCV EDC and are proud to be supporting our business community as we make our way into this new world. So with that, I want to turn it back over to Holly to introduce all of our great panelists today. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, John, and appreciate the partnership. We do have a great panel today, and today, we get into the real core of reopening, which is getting back into physical space. We've talked about telecommuting, and we've talked about human resource management. We've talked about a lot of different topics, but when you have to apply all of these measures in a physical office is really where kind of the rubber meets the road. So we have a great set of panelists for you today that I'm pleased to introduce. We have Brian Kite, who's a managing partner at SRK Architects, and he's going to talk a little bit from the architect point of view about some of the sort of principles that companies are looking at. Craig McCrary is the president of Neotech Products, which is one of our medical device companies here in the Santa Cruz Valley. Eric Jensen is VP of Operations at Freylock, one of the great aerospace companies here in the Santa Cruz Valley. And Greg Amsler is the owner proprietor of Salt Creek Grill, a place where many of us, at least in the past, have dined and certainly have done some takeout as we go through. So I want to just have each one do a little bit more introduction of your companies and how you've been adjusting to this. And so why don't we start a little bit on the manufacturing side? And so Eric, maybe I'll start with you. Just talk a little bit about Freylock, and you were clearly deemed an essential business. And so what was that like, and what were some of the initial things that you had to do when the Safer at Home order came in?
Thank you, Holly. Pleasure to be here. So initially, we had to ensure that we were essential business. There was a lot of research that occurred for that. We are a manufacturer of thin polyimide films for aerospace, medical, semiconductor, including having some DFAS rated contracts. So that was the first step. And then the next step was to determine what do we need to do to keep our employees safe. We have about 185 employees over 3 shifts, 5 to 6 days a week. So we knew we needed to stay open, but there was a long list of things that we worked through over months. We're still putting in place today. Social distancing, how do we check people? Can we check people's temperatures? And we started with who's going to actually show up to work. At one point, we had lost 30 of our employees out on a variety of leaves. We had to bring in temps. So there's 3 of us on the executive team that met for hours every day, laying out an illness prevention plan, infectious disease plan, scouring all the documentation that continued to come out, and more has come out last week, and then modifying our safety manual, having socially distant town hall meetings with folks so that we could communicate what was going on, providing a variety of elements for hand sanitizer, gloves, masks, tape on the floor. We took 4 tables out of the lunchroom. We separated the chairs. We put up barriers for tables at the lunchroom so people can take off their masks. There's a long list of things that I won't go into right now, but it was an iterative learning process. And some of our bigger struggles was understanding really as we went forward what was required. If you remember, there was a point in time where people were told you don't need to wear a mask.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look back 2 or 3 months ago or mid-March when we really got hammered, the roadmap was much different than it is today. So we focused on number 1, keeping people safe, being flexible with people, giving them an opportunity to take care of their families and be safe, and then putting plans into place to make sure before they get here they're safe, when they come in they're safe, and if something happens we have protocol. If somebody's been exposed or if somebody has been diagnosed with, we have a protocol and a cleaning process and a contact tracing process. So it's a 13-page document.
Yeah, great. And as you say, adapting, because originally the guidance was don't wear masks. They're not going to really help. And now, of course, the guidance is. And so it's been an evolving learning process from top to bottom. Yeah. So Craig, talk a little bit about the Neotech situation. Tell us just a little bit about the company and your employee profile, and what was that learning process like at your facility?
Sure. So thank you very much for having us participate here. Neotech makes disposable medical devices primarily for premature babies, children with special needs, and so we had some word of what was coming, knew we were called out as essential, and really started with our employees, trying to kind of prepare them for what was coming, and of course we were off on some of our predictions, but reaching to the employees, what it means to be essential, what it means to come to work, and then our vendors as well, to make sure that they were part of being essential. Even if they make plastic bags for us, they're just as important as any of our components. So trying to stay ahead of it was really impossible, as you said, with the masks and things. What what we implemented on Monday was probably obsolete by Friday, but a lot of the things that Eric mentioned, we've implemented, and yet we're still doing new things today. So it definitely has been a challenge for the team. Really proud of our team, and we had some people working from home for a while, and now we're back to being fully staffed here at the office.
Great. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So now, Greg, we're going to switch a little bit to the, to the restaurant sector, just to bring in a different perspective. You had to completely reinvent Salt Creek Grill in some extent.
Yeah, and again, thank you for having all of us today. We've been open here for almost 21 years. Our anniversary will be next month. And yeah, obviously, none of us have ever been through anything like this. We had to switch gears because we are a 95 to 99% dine-in restaurant. We don't do a whole lot of takeout. And then when March 18th hit, that's all we were allowed to do. So it was some quick shifting, some changes to our core procedures, how we were going to do things. Obviously, the maintaining of the physical space was a big deal. With the masks, the sanitizers, how we address our vendors coming in the door, how we address working with our customers. We've been basically doing curbside pickup. We started with people coming in the door, and then we realized we didn't really need to do that. And we were able to do it and accomplish it just by curbside. We're about 20 to 25% of our average sales, which is quite a hit. It's going to be interesting going forward because we're not sure yet what exactly we can do. We don't know if it's going to be a percentage of dine-in, whether it's going to be 25%, 50%, or if it's just going to be a function of physical spacing. Our restaurant has a lot of booths, which are obviously permanent. So we can't remove the booths, so we're going to have to sit the booths where the people will be at least 6 feet apart. And that'll turn out to be about 50% capacity anyway. So economics wise, we're going to have to start worrying about and working on a 50% revenue stream versus like the 100% revenue stream. So it's been interesting for the last couple of months. We've learned a lot, and we've been able to revamp a lot of our stuff, a lot of our takeout containers we've changed, make them a little more secure, make them a little more eco-friendly. Our menu has been pared back to allow items that are a little better to travel. A lot of our seafood items that were on our original menu don't travel well. You just don't want to take out some of the items that we had. So we had to drastically change our menu, add a few new things, and we're about probably a third to a half of what our original menu is. Once we do get to open, we will bring everything back. We will continue doing a lot of takeout, but for us, it's going to be a lot of physical distancing and then trying to adhere to the rules once we get the rules, and that's going to be the big thing.
Yeah, getting those rules, which we sort of have some pieces of it, but not fully for LA County yet at this point.
Thanks.
So Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you, and Brian, you're going to give us a few kind of principles of things that folks are talking about. So I'm going to switch. So I think now I'm going to check there. Yep. So your screen is there. So I'll let you do a quick introduction and everybody gets to see my emails come in. I'm not sure how to fix that. So I'm going to let you just describe a little bit about, that didn't work, sorry. Hold on, technology differences. But go ahead, Brian, and start doing an intro while I figure out my technology here.
Thank you, Holly, and panel. I'll just give you a little bit of rendition on our personal experience. We're an architectural firm, 41 years. And the thing about architecture is it's gone primarily electronic anyway. we actually don't have a product. In fact, when we do have a work product, it comes via our printer. So plans go to the field, plans but they're all drawn electronically. So in this case, when March rolled around, the decision was made to just literally pick up our computers and take them home. And so all of my 20 staff essentially are working from home, with the exception of one who is here to just make sure our file server works. So we, again, an electronic age, but our basic business model, everybody has an image of how architects work. It has a lot to do with clutter. We like to design spaces that are pristine, but if you really look at our office, we generally have nothing but piles of paper, large format and small format. So we've had to completely rethink that. Of course, in our particular case, all of our furnishings were demountable, modular furnishings. So we immediately engaged in a process to figure out, and of course we know how to plan. So we planned our own space to get 6 feet of distancing. And that meant that the lobby, which was never that pristine, got even less pristine, because we literally needed the space. With 20 people, you can imagine. So it's been an interesting process, but by and large, and the good thing is that architecture, from society's perspective, falls behind construction. So construction has gone on in the state of California. So therefore, we became an essential business by proxy of needing to maintain all of our projects in construction during this time. So that's been a good thing for us. So I can kind of walk through the slides, but in the big picture, we know that the workplace, there are lots of different types of workplaces, but in general, office is still probably the largest single component. So whereas clutter was maybe a part of the workspace, now we need to really be thinking about how to keep surfaces available so that they can be cleaned, because it's hard to clean individual pieces of paper or stacked up. So clutter is really bad. We know that in interior environments in particular, they are static in their, on a weekend, but the minute that somebody walks in the door, it's a dynamic environment, as is the mechanical system. And between people and mechanical systems and everything else that goes along with that, the way a facility, any internal facility operates, is very dynamic. So types of processes, obviously, in an individual workspace, we all remember the old bullpens from the 80s. Those were about 6 by 6, and that's about the safe distance. But it doesn't account for our current modes of working. So the old traditional workspace was offices on the perimeter and bullpen in the middle. And then maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we've gotten to the open office, which is both good and bad from the COVID perspective, because whereas it was more about acoustics before, now it's about transmissibility through airborne vehicles. So how we work independently is pretty much the easy part. How we work collaboratively is the difficult challenge. Go ahead. Again, to the next one. So a lot of ways to function in an environment. Obviously, close contact needs to be protected. It needs to be short. In spaces in an open office work environment where you have a lot of space, you can co-work with others for hours. But literally, we're having to rethink, the normal scenario. Hey, Joe, do you have an extra pencil? And going over to their workspace has to be rethought. So there are lots of ways to do that. Visual cues. For instance, the slide that's on there, if you have the ability to use directional arrows to be not only intuitive, but to essentially visually assist staff, because we're all human beings. We forget things. We forget even this period of time, this quarter. So we need reminders. Plus, we need to lay out our workspaces or adjust our workspaces to be able to, as much as we can intuitively and without a lot of help, make it visually very easy to do the right thing. Conference spaces in particular, lots of different ways to do that. So of course, all of this has to do with levels of occupancy concentrations. So on the chart you see there is everything from a general office, which is 1 person per 150 square feet, down to banquet halls, which is 1 person per 5 square feet. Restaurants fall in the middle, 1 per 15. And this code, this is the California Building Code. So what it does give you is a sense of the perspective of what occupancy concentrations constitute. So restaurants are somewhere in the middle, classrooms somewhere in the middle, offices are the least, call centers, because you can imagine you have people just lined up with call centers. They're a lot higher occupants load, but that gives you a general sense of the range of occupancies that exist that are permitted by code. So within the realm of co-work spaces, such as lobbies, receptions, everything that is shared, there are special considerations. So a normal lobby in a normal office building is your front door, the living room. It's a nice space, but now it's an input and screening area. It's where things get sorted out, and who goes where has to be sorted out. So one has to think about that very much differently. Restrooms are a particular concern. Single accommodation restrooms are individually used, so therefore it gets down to the protocols that you establish and the degree to which the employees and the users adhere to those protocols. So obviously cleaning the surface on your way out and making sure that you're doing everything to the proper COVID protocols that exist today. Multiple accommodation restrooms are a very different story. I think that this is where air exhaust becomes a very interesting and important element of that. Break rooms, which generally are owned by no one, right? Everybody uses a break room when they need it, and as soon as they don't need it, it's like it never existed. So I think we have to a certain extent, rethink how we use these kind of co-use spaces, because there are important reasons for transmissibility that we want to eliminate as much as possible. Elevators, again, a very particular thing, because it's not they're ventilated, but they're not air conditioned per se. So if you sneeze while in an elevator, the surfaces are another matter, but the air circulation is a big deal. So to whatever extent you're able to use exterior access, stair access, whether in a free air environment, it's going to be better. But I think that we'll be thinking about how elevators are equipped and accessorized, a lot more touchless facilities in general. So that's an overview there. So ASHRAE, which is the American Society of Heating and Refrigerating Engineers, essentially designed the mechanical spaces. So what we know is that airborne transmission of COVID-19 can be a problem depending upon, number one, distance, but it's and where the infection lands, but interrupting the chain of infection is a key term that ASHRAE defines, and how to disseminate it. We know the standard ones, which is coughing and sneezing, but such things as shouting, singing, even flushing the toilets. Excuse me for the term, but it's important to get it out there. That in itself is a factor. So these are the kinds of things that all architects and engineers are thinking about. Many of them are longer term, and we're not going to necessarily solve them all today because we're really in an emergency mode, but ongoing, it's a very important factor. Basic mechanical systems. You can probably see from my screen there's a mechanical supply and return register in the space that I'm in. Where they're located, particularly the return air or exhaust air, is extremely important. And so spaces, multi-tenant spaces in an office building that shares a common air plenum for return is not good, because you basically have contaminated air moving across the ceiling from one tenant space to the next. So thinking about that is a very important element. And last but not least, natural ventilation. Wherever natural ventilation can be brought into a space, obviously in an office space, you have differential pressures from one side of a building to the next. So if you open windows on one side and the other side, you can get an airflow through there that will be obtrusive to the mode of operation. But to the maximum extent possible, what you want to do is, either if you have to have recirculated air, have filtered recirculated air, and maximize natural air. And there are many kinds of spaces that actually have 100% outside air. So a lot of things to look at in this regard, but it is the kind of the next medium-term consideration as we looked into this year and next year. And last but not least, differentials, things like hospitals, they have anterooms to make sure that the pressure differentials are maintained. Obviously, that's expensive. That's not something you're going to do in a standard office, but could very well be in any kind of a shop or industrial application. The airflows are extremely important. UV protection is considered to be an adjunct to filtration. It's not 100% known, but it's a factor. But the CDC has defined it as an adjunct to filtration. And then relative temperature and humidity is a very big question that is in different climates have very different implications. So everything related to humidity is on a case-by-case basis with respect to how transmission occurs in a building. So that's kind of a quick summary.
So a lot of info in there. And so what I want to do with the time we have is talk through some of those elements and how the ones that are relevant are coming in. And so maybe I was thinking maybe what we do is we walk a little bit through a day of what is going on. And so maybe Craig, I'll start with you. When employees are coming in, what are they doing when they come into your facility? You run a single shift, I think. So just talk a little bit about what that process is for them to come into the building.
Yeah, so for Neotech, it's just one shift, 5 days a week. And we just established one basic entry point. We used to have people coming in side doors, back doors. They come through the front. We implemented temperature checks about 2 weeks ago, ask them a few questions, and essentially wait in line if they're coming in. We have a few that are a little bit staggered on the shifts, but really just forcing them to come through one entry point was one of the steps we've taken so far.
And you are testing, and Eric, you're temperature testing as well, but you have multiple shifts. So what is that process like?
Well, actually, we don't temperature test yet. We are procuring facial recognition temperature testing.
Okay.
So, and we have 2 entrances. All of our doors are locked. Before, the employees have signed something that says they won't come to work if they're sick. And when they have the keypad to punch in, and when they come in, there's spacing for them to stand to go through the time clock. We have a wipe because it's a biometric time clock, so they can wipe their finger and wipe the time clock. There is hand sanitizer right at that station. There's signs that say you have to wear a mask. You have to wear a mask to walk into the building. And so all of this is just to get in the building. And we added an additional time clock. So now we have 3 time clocks so people can come in from 2 different entrances. Time clocks, of course, are just for the hourly people, though. But again, there's a protocol just for showing up. You can't be sick. You've got to wear a mask. And ultimately, we'll have a facial recognition scanner for temperature that's going to email or text. I haven't read the directions yet. I've got to figure it out. As I joked with some of the folks earlier, and if your temperature is over a certain range, we're going to drop a net on you, and then we're going to take you away.
It'll be like the game Mousetrap.
Right, very much so.
So, and Greg, as you have folks coming in, I want to go both from when you're bringing people in to also when you are, starting to talk about the workspace itself. I mean, a kitchen is only so big. So talk a little bit about how people are coming in and then how you are working within your, what's your production environment, so to speak.
Well, we've had a skeleton crew, and anybody that walks in the building has to wear a mask. We have not started temperature checks yet. In fact, I've been waiting for my digital thermometer for a little bit, and it just arrived a couple of days ago, which kind of brings us to another problem is there is still some supply problems out there for masks, for thermometers, for sanitizers. But we do have a number of sanitizing stations around the restaurant. The back of the house, which is the kitchen, we have workspaces which are 6 feet apart. So if somebody is, for example, cutting meat, they'll have their station, they'll be 6 feet away from somebody that may be handling produce or seafood or what have you. As far as the front of the house and the servers, they come in, the first thing they do and the last thing they do. So it's kind of a little bit redundancy there, which I like. But the first thing, the last thing they do is put on gloves. They already have their mask on, and they sanitize the entire work area. That would include the computers, any pens we may use, any check presenters, the books that your check comes in, surfaces, doors, etc. So that's all taken care of both at the beginning of each shift and at the end. We will start taking temperatures as soon as we can. Once we get the go ahead to start opening, then it's going to be a matter of sanitizing the dining areas and the bar top, the host stand, each table, each chair, and we will be doing that. Will be done continuously. It'll be done before somebody sits at a table, and it'll be done as soon as they leave.
Eric and Craig, Brian talked about the lobby area where, historically you would receive visitors, whether they were customers or vendors. Have you made changes to what's happening there in your lobby and your sort of receiving area?
Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, we have no visitors. We've put our welcome sign that used to welcome our guests, now has some positive messages for the staff, but really we have a conference room right off the lobby area, and usually our HR person is there with the thermometer, and we don't lock the doors during the day, but really keep them closed. And other than the mailman through the front door and UPS and FedEx through the back door, got marks on the floor, and when people are all coming in at 7 o'clock, they line up 6-8 feet apart and wait for their temperature check. And we try to do it in private around, but again, we have protocols. If it registers high, then what do we do next? It's kind of sad. The lunchroom is really what gets me sad, because we're such a gregarious company and we love our potlucks and our parties and our get-togethers, and now it's just one chair here and one chair out in the warehouse and things. But that's the changes we've had to make, and that's okay.
Eric?
So we, for security reasons, locked the building completely prior to this. And we already required FOD compliance form to be filled out, an ITAR form to be filled out. Now we have a declaration form theoretically before you can get into the building, or you won't get past the lobby, about your health. If you're a supplier or a visitor, we don't have that many visitors. So anybody that comes into the building is either an employee that's agreed to not come if they're sick, or they're a supplier and they've filled out a document. I signed one this morning. It says I don't have a cough, et cetera, follows a particular protocol. We have we have an incoming dock, we have a shipping dock, so we have to maintain those. And I'm gonna jump ahead just a little bit, Holly, but in our break room, we took out, I think, 4 tables, and we made some not very attractive dividers for the break room tables, so that you can sit 3 people at a table and they can have a level of protection and not necessarily be 6 feet apart. And we're gonna procure some see-through dividers so we can put more people at tables and in conference rooms with protection. If somebody's sitting there for lunch, they've got to take their mask off to eat or for break. So we want to make sure there's a level of protection. So that's one of the things we're doing.
Have you changed the number of folks that take a break at a given time? Have you made staggering of any of your shifts at all at this point?
Yes, I've staggered. We have people coming in between 6 and 8:30. We've staggered the shifts by 15 minutes. We've staggered all the breaks. It's a little complicated with, fortunately, the second and third shifts aren't as heavy, but absolutely, because you want to avoid queuing if at all possible. We have the marks on the floor, and then we've only got one door in and out of the break room, so it's another choke point. But if everybody's wearing a mask, passing somebody with a close distance for 10 or 15 seconds isn't an issue. And we do clean. We have somebody hired just to clean regularly. Microwaves, door handles, punch pads. We clean the lunchroom thoroughly once a day. We clean throughout the facility 3 times a day, on first, twice on second, and twice on third. And we
Craig, you've
bought a
also,
55-gallon drum of alcohol, and we use spray bottles.
yeah. Craig, you've taken your break and started, I mean, fortunately for Southern California weather, you've started to spill out a little bit outside, right? If I understand right?
We have some tables outside. Folks can sit outside. This is an interesting question. You know, people said, do I have to wear my mask in the parking lot? Well, we're encouraging you to stay 6 feet apart. And if you're going to be sitting for lunch on one of the pieces of furniture, you've got to stay 6 feet apart. But I can't control what you do on your break in the parking lot, up and down the street, or once you get in your car.
Great point, because there's only things some things you can do on on what folks have freedom on their breaks. Interesting, very interesting dilemma there. Craig, you guys are also spilling out, and I think Brian wants to jump in.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
Well, I was just gonna say, you know, the whole inside outside is such a key part, because obviously once you get outside, the criteria completely changes. The degree to which you can get outside certainly relieves that pressure. But I was curious of, you know, the entry point, and particularly for a restaurant. Greg, I was thinking about you. You know, normally waiting to get into a restaurant is not a scenario where you have a lot of space. So obviously, and essentially primarily indoor restaurant, you're limited. You can't put your tables outside, but people can wait outside before coming in. I was curious about how you're thinking about handling that.
Well, we will have floor signage, and what we're probably going to do is have a greeter outside the door. And then we will have the floor signage outside our front door, so people know where they can stand 6 feet away. The greeter will ask how many in your party, open the door for them, then they'll walk in. There'll be another floor signage 6 feet inside, and then another host will take them to the tables, whichever tables are still open at that point. It's interesting you said that. The ABC has allowed us to do temporary enclosed areas that we can serve food and alcohol, as long as we are controlled and within eyesight of those guests. So we are looking at possibly putting up some tenting or some umbrellas and having tables and chairs outside to increase our capacity. One of the biggest problems we're going to have is, although we're going to be open, if we're open at 50% capacity, most of our food costs, or excuse me, most of our fixed costs will stay at 100%. So rent, insurance, utilities, et cetera, those are all going to be at 100%. So we need to figure out how to make the footprint of our 50% larger. So we're still looking at that. One of the problems with doing this here in Santa Clarita is we're about to start hitting a lot of 100-degree days. So even though we may have tents and umbrellas outside, it might still be very, very warm. So we're looking at things. That's
and I was going to say, visitors are probably not a good thing at this stage.
No, it's a challenge. It's been an interesting couple of months, but we're muddling our way through it.
Great.
So it sounds like, we kind of talked a little bit about breaks. What about your vendors and your suppliers, right? Who, perhaps you've had folks that have worked, with a long time that maybe had relatively free or, pretty fluid entrance exit in before COVID, and now what's happening there with your folks?
So for Neotech, we just said nobody, as I mentioned before, and actually talking with this group here, I picked up some things from Eric and some things we're going to do going forward, but asking them the basic questions, taking the temperatures. As you said, we have one vendor who's been with us 25 years. He comes every Wednesday. He's usually here for lunch, and we haven't seen him in 3 months now. So we do a lot of it virtually, and we realize that you can get a lot done through the computer, through the screen, through sharing screens. So starting in June, we will allow certain vendors and suppliers to come back in, but questions, temperature, the same masks, the same rules that apply to staff will apply to all or any or all visitors.
I had a question for Eric as well. Eric, you have 3 shifts, right? So there's no space in between. You got people leaving and people entering simultaneously. How does that work?
So, well, we've staggered the shifts to some degree just to limit the queuing, and we've got 2 entry doors, so people can go out either entry and exit door. And if you're just passing each other with a mask on within 6 feet, our opinion and our understanding is there's not that much risk. And there's, and people are in the habit. There's hand sanitizer throughout the building. They hand sanitize before they go to their car. They hand sanitize when they come in the building. They wash their hands on a regular basis. It's starting to become the norm. So yeah, and we're trying to limit the congestion and we're trying to limit the traffic flow, right? So we've got a meter on the on-ramp. You only let so many people in at a time. I don't have an exact number. That's the best we can do at this point.
And one thing for Neotech, so we do medical device assembly, and we already had sanitizers and hand washing protocols, but now that it's become obviously more important for everybody, we realized that a lot of people were washing their hands in the kitchen, and that's kind of a tight area. And then the employees going back to assembly could only wash their hands in the restroom. So we actually rented the portable wash stations, put those outside the assembly room and outside the lunchroom. And we may end up owning those things pretty soon here, but that's been one little thing that I think has had a pretty positive impact. And then it's obviously a reminder before you go in the lunchroom or before you go back into the assembly room. It's right there and it's convenient. So that's been one thing that I think has worked out pretty well for us.
So Holly, and to also answer your question, Brian, so with our 55-gallon drum, by the way, we've already gone through one, we bought another. So people are required to wipe down their workstations. If they move to one workstation to another during a shift, they wipe down their workstation. We let them wipe down their own workstation, assuming they'll clean it as well as anybody, because it's literally their lives are at risk. We have these 70% alcohol bottles around the facility. People can use them. We've handed out hand sanitizer, although we have to be careful on the factory floor because we can't have any contaminants on the factory floor. We've been handing out spray bottles. We're making this stuff readily available to folks. Our thought process is if we have to shut the facility, we've had a couple of occurrences where people were exposed, where we've had to close particular areas. It's a significant loss of money. So significant loss of productivity. We'll probably have to make it overtime and hopefully not a loss of business. So we're costly, but we're investing to make sure that as much as possible, people are safe so they don't get ill, their families don't get ill, and they get to come to work. And that's our primary driver.
What sort of training programs, what are you doing to communicate all of this, especially as you've been evolving these, again, it's been nothing but a crash course in learning about how to manage this for the past 2 months. And so how have you been communicating with your employees what the protocols are, how they're changing, taking feedback from them, and what do you see going forward in terms of continuing to reinforce the practices that you're going to need to keep the workplace safe?
Well, for us, there's texts. We have everybody's phone number. We text them some information if it's a brief blurb. On ADP, we post documentation They can read on ADP. Having all hands meetings where we'll put people, we can put 30 people in lunchroom 6 feet apart. And then in conference rooms, then people dial in from home. We have webinars. We also have a battery powered laptop with speakers that we roll out into the factory. We have an all hands meeting tomorrow at 10. So we gather questions in advance. We answer questions with during the all hands presentations, and we gather questions just off the floor or in a suggestion box. We want to understand. We also gather a lot of ideas. People ask, well, have you thought about this? And sometimes, no, actually, we haven't thought about that. So we by gathering this information, then we regularly communicating back, weekly, sometimes daily, not so much as we were initially. Initially, there was a lot of communication going back and forth because things were changing so much. Again, we're going to have an all hands meeting tomorrow for roughly half an hour. And people at home, we still have 30 people, 25 people working at home. They'll dial in.
Craig, and then
So
Greg.
real quick, we, medical device company, we're ISO certified. We have a process called document control, and we would have one person, back in the February days, he'd walk around the office with the pen, bring you the document, we'd each review it, sign it, and we quickly realized that was not a good idea. So going to something like DocuSign, reduced touch points for us and something that seems so obvious. And then prior to speaking with this group, we hadn't even considered what Brian talked about for airflow circulation. So we're continuing to look at that, but trying to just, as Eric was saying, keep in touch with the employees, keep connected with them, ask how they're doing, see what they need. We give out toilet paper and paper towels to people, and then having those supplies readily available for our staff. We already had masks and gloves and sanitizers since we were a medical device, but then putting those all throughout the office. So if they need masks, they can take a couple home for their family or their caregivers, their gloves. And we actually had ordered little sanitizers to give away as promotional items at trade shows. And since we haven't done any trade shows this year, the employees are all well stocked with our sanitizers for giveaways.
Greg.
And Greg.
I wanted to ask Eric a question. So far, obviously, we've been on a very skeleton staff. We usually don't have more than 6 employees in our restaurant at a time. When you say all hands meeting, how do you do a large group meeting when you have to be socially distanced?
So we could put, in our largest conference room, we could put 10 people. In lunchroom, we could put 30 people. It's all a webinar. And then people who are dialing in from home, anybody that's got a desktop dials in from the desktop. And then we have this mobile laptop with a speaker that we roll out in the factory, and then people spread apart in the factory. Everybody's wearing masks out. If they're near each other, everybody's wearing masks. So we don't cover the third shift necessarily, but we can cover first and second, and then we catch up with the third.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, talking about the office space and then throw it out to the others, you talked about the open floor plan. If somebody does have cubicles that are higher cubicles, do they still need to do 6 feet? Or what's kind of the current thinking on that? And then I wonder, just if you're in a restaurant setting, if you over time, if you have high, because some of the booths at Salt Creek have sort of high walls, and in time, do we think that might be, a something that's very useful that we might see in other restaurants?
So that's a great question. Just conceptually, the degree to which you can individualize either a small group or an individual, 2 or 3 people, with respect to the airflow is the degree to which you're able to reduce the risk. So it's the horizontal movement of air that if it gets to one contaminated person and the air is moving horizontally, it will, and it's an open space. But obviously interrupting that, anytime you can interrupt it or lessen it, it just reduces the risk. Again, it is a mysterious disease, so we don't know for sure. But the ASHRAE standards talk about ways to alter, say, a return air grill to bring it down to the floor so that you're dropping, in the case of a cooling condition, you're dropping cool air high and exhausting it from a low point. Many lesser systems essentially supply and return in the same space, and that tends to move it horizontally. So if you have a a barrier, any physical barrier will reduce the risk. So none of it is 100%. It's all about risk factors, and the actual contraction is never really known, at least not at this stage. So any kind of barriers, we don't find ourselves, except in our conference room, instead of having our conference room of 18 is become 10. And so I think how you think of how you meet in a co-work space. But if you look at your communal spaces, whatever they were, they're about half that now in order to stay safe generally.
Yeah.
So
are
Holly,
there, yeah.
I'm sorry, Holly. So we're planning, whether this is right or wrong, I'm getting a prototype with a plexiglass 2.5 foot wide, 2 foot tall barriers. We're going to put it in our lunchroom. But we're also looking at, can we put them in the conference room? So we have a 22-foot table. I can put those in the conference rooms, and maybe people are 3 feet apart, 4 feet apart, but with barriers between them. So we're contemplating that.
Yeah, we're going to start seeing, and you already start seeing, some pretty creative ideas of, sort of lampshade type things that people are, can put over them, and it'll be, who knows which will both work effectively as we learn more about the disease and be accepted, socially, as which are more effective and give more confidence and still allow you to talk to people, et cetera. Yeah, we're going to see a lot of interesting things. Go ahead, Craig.
Couple of our guys here got creative, and we had an IV pole here for some of our products that we were testing, and so they've actually hung some plexiglass from these IV poles and now have kind of a portable way to move them between certain workstations. It's creative and it's something. It's better than nothing, and that's where
writing that down.
We're all trying different things. Like I said, what works this week might be completely different next week, but. Go ahead, Brian.
So, Holly, I think my sense is about the time we get it completely solved physically is when the vaccine will arrive. That's Murphy's Law.
Murphy's Law, always in there. Brian, what are you hearing about, in terms of, design, about larger groups and larger spaces, whether that be at conference sites? I mean, sounds like Eric got a pretty decent sized conference room, but from small conference rooms to big conference room to churches or other congregate sites, what's some of the thinking going on there that you're seeing in the architecture world?
So a lot of what we talked about today is about fixtures, fixed elements. So the 1 to 5, 1 person per 5 square feet, which is the most dense occupied space, is basically a flat floor with no chairs, people standing. And, as it relates to stadiums, obviously outdoor stadiums are going to be better than indoor stadiums, or easier, because you're going to have to deal with a mechanical system. But I think it's about how we group, we've even had discussions with some of our colleagues. One of the problems that you see on the news is, people going to the beach, right? Well, it wouldn't be that difficult to create lanes even on a sandy beach, so that people kind of have some idea. They're not reminded of what social distancing is when, for instance, they go to the beach or they go to a large assembly space, whether it's a banquet room. I mean, it's a little bit of it is behavioral training and just being aware, and really the kind of the way we remind people and make it intuitive and make it sort of fun, or try to make it a little bit fun, is part of what I think we ought to try to get to, so that because yes, it's deadly serious, but it's also it can be treated as a little bit of a game. How do you move around in such a way that we're not endangering one another?
Yeah. Well, I think anything, those creative solutions that make it easier for people to do what they're supposed to do are, of course, always going to be helpful. So we've kind of gone through a little bit of the day. We talked about breaks. And so what about closeout procedures and people leaving? I mean, we talked about sort of the sanitation, but people then go home to their families. And, so what's been the conversation with your employees about that intersection between work and home, and how to keep both their coworkers safe, but keep their home safe. So have you guys had conversations with your employees about that interaction, and what might be things you're doing in place to support them?
So if I could just chime in real quick. So as I mentioned, prior, luckily we had access to some PPE, and there definitely is a shortage out there. It is real, but just kind of touching base with them, communicating with them. You can't, who knows what they do when they leave the doors here, but reminding them of the importance of our job. Being essential is a big word. Everybody's essential, but the importance of our job here. We have a responsibility to be safe when we're not here. So just trying to communicate with them, check in with them. And as I mentioned, if they need masks or gloves or sanitizers to take home, they have an elderly parent they're caring for, or someone in their family that might be compromised, just making those supplies available and checking in to see what they need beyond the walls here. So I think just the communication with our staff has been really important and valuable.
That's great. I was going to add that because we have a pretty small group, 20 people, we have a 4 o'clock Friday afternoon Zoom conference. What I find is that by 4 o'clock on a Friday, people are not thinking about work as a general rule. And so it offers just a little bit of a transition, because all of our staff are still working, yet they're winding down. So it gives us a chance. In fact, I've learned an awful lot about staff that I didn't know just in the process of that 1 hour conversation. But it does allow, without being intrusive, because obviously people have their private lives and that's the way it should be, but just reminding them that, okay, now you're going to transition for the weekend into your personal life. We're still here and we'll be here on Monday is kind of the message.
Yeah.
Holly, just a couple of quick things. I think it's really been covered. With people go home, all the things that you guys have said, but also if you get exposed, you have to let us know. And we have a documented protocol that we follow. So as soon as you find out, please let us know. Then we have to do some level of research. We have asked people to sign forms that say, if I get it, I will let you release my name. Not everybody has. It makes the contract tracing much more difficult. But that's the things I would add. And you got to have a plan, because we've already 3 times had folks been exposed. Didn't matter what time it was, we would just roll into our protocol, especially with 3 shifts. So I would encourage anybody that's got a business that's open or reopening, you've got to have a protocol for when somebody gets exposed and or they've got it and they show up to work. They didn't know it.
Yeah, good, very good points. All right, we are just out of time. Do we have, do you guys have a quick, we're just gonna kind of do this as the rapid fire. So the one last thing that you would give as a piece of advice to folks as they look at ramping up, scaling up, and getting, hopefully moving back towards some more levels of normalcy. So one last great tip you would give. Anyone?
Patience. It's going to be patience. We went to Santa Barbara yesterday and went to a couple of different restaurants, and it's a whole new world as far as the restaurant game is concerned. And there's going to be a little bit more waiting, a little less spontaneous fun, so to speak. And you're going to have to realize that things aren't going to be the same. So just be patient. And as we get farther and farther out, we'll be able to loosen up more and more.
Great points.
And there was I believe the quote goes back to Winston Churchill, so forgive my use of the language, but we've used it before. And it is, if you're going through hell, you keep going. And it's been a challenge for everybody, but patience, perseverance, keep going, be flexible, listen. And I think, I think Eric was saying, ask the staff for their input. But I think, we keep going, and each day hopefully is better than the last.
Eric?
So I absolutely, I agree. We're all in the same boat. Work together. It's a chance to come together. Often crises cause people Hold on, I got to shut off an announcement here. There we go. Cause people to come together, but you've got to keep up with the documentation that's out there too. So the County of Los Angeles Public Health Order that came out on May 13th, Appendix C, workplace practices, protect employee health. It depends on what kind of operation you have. So we keep up with what's going on with the CDC, and we keep up with what's coming out from the government because it is evolving. Yeah, so you've got to be patient, persevere, and work together. We'll get through.
Great. So for me, it's communicate our interdependence. And in doing so, we're taking care of our collective larger interest.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I want to thank all of you for sharing your experiences and your wisdom here. Really helpful. Really interesting, and I liked walking through the day there. That was really great. And thank everybody for tuning in. We do have one more webinar. It is a little different than the ones we've been doing. We are doing an economic update with our economist, Dr. Mark Schneep, who's going to talk a little about what he sees in the future, both in the Santa Clarita Valley, but also globally, really, because this has been a global crisis. Again, as I mentioned, you can see all of the previous webinars that have been recorded. You can get links to all of those on our website, scvedc.org/scaling-up. We have some other resources for you. Eric mentioned all the public health orders. All of that information, as it changes, is available on our resource page, which is scvedc.org/coronavirus. The Chamber also has a resource page. We are really trying to stay on top of everything and provide you what you need going forward. So I want to again thank our panelists for being here. Thank everybody for tuning in, and have a really great day. Be safe, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Holly.
Thank you.
Here.